At 3 in the morning, I woke up to concrete trucks growling behind my house, and for one half-asleep second, I thought I was dreaming. Then the smell hit me, wet cement Diesel Creek mud, and I knew somebody had done something real stupid. By the time I stepped outside in my bathrobe, the little creek my wife Martha loved more than anything was trapped behind a fresh concrete wall, and Veronica Ashworth was standing there like she'd just improved the neighborhood. She looked at me calm as a tax bill and said, "Mosquito control, Earl. Deal with it." That creek had carried my wife through chemo. On bad nights, when the pain medicine barely touched her, she'd ask me to open the bedroom window wider so she could hear the water. During her second remission, she planted an oak grove along that bank from her wheelchair, pointing where each sapling should go, smiling like every hole I dug was a small act of defiance. She didn't get much more time after that. What she left me instead was a promise if anybody ever threatened this place, I was supposed to fight for it. So when I saw that concrete dam backing Willow Creek into my yard and drowning those trees, I wasn't looking at a drainage project. I was looking at somebody putting a price tag on my peace. I'm Earl Hutchinson, 58, retired after 30 years with the EPA in water quality enforcement. I know creek flow, wetlands law, and the smell of a bad cover story before breakfast. Upstream from me sat Pine Valley, one of those gated neighborhoods full of oversized houses, manicured lawns, and people who think HOA dues are the same thing as wisdom. Veronica was the kind of woman who looked expensive from 50 feet away, sharp suit, sharp perfume, sharper mouth. She was trying to sell her mansion, and spring rains had left standing water near the Pine Valley clubhouse. She decided it looked bad for buyers, so she had a crew divert Willow Creek away from their side and into mine. No permits, no notice, no environmental review. Just concrete trucks before dawn and enough arrogance to pave a runway. By sunrise, my basement had water in it for the first time in 32 years. The whole place smelled like wet drywall and old earth. Worse than that, Martha's Grove was sitting in water it was never meant to hold. I called Veronica while I was still shaking. She said, "Your property's always been flood-prone, Earl." That lie was so clean and polished it almost deserved applause. So I documented everything: photos, GPS, points, water levels, drainage patterns, contamination risk, the whole ugly picture. I filed a county complaint so tight a lazy inspector could have won with it. 3 days later, County Inspector Mike Castellanos called and promised he'd come Friday morning. Friday came, Friday went, no Mike. When I called the county office, the secretary told me the inspection had already been completed. No violations found. Case closed. I just stood there in my kitchen staring at the phone because unless Mike had inspected my creek from the moon, he hadn't seen a damn thing. The concrete barrier was still there. My basement was still wet. My wife's grove was still taking a beating. I drove up to Pine Valley and found Veronica in the clubhouse rose garden watering flowers like a woman auditioning for a magazine cover. Before I even spoke, she smiled and said, "Heard your complaint didn't go the way you hoped." That was the moment it stopped being a drainage dispute and became a corruption case. So I started watching. The next Tuesday, I parked across from the clubhouse with binoculars and a camera. Around 11:15, Veronica's white BMW rolled in. A few minutes later, Mike Castellanos met her beside his county vehicle. She handed him a thick white envelope, quick and casual. I got the whole thing on camera. The next morning, I called Mike and recorded the conversation. He told me maybe it'd be smarter to work with the HOA. I'd heard that phrase before in my EPA days. It usually meant somebody wanted the law to take a coffee break while money changed hands. So I said, "Mike, I spent 30 years investigating environmental crimes. You want to rethink your position before I send my evidence to the ethics board and the FBI?" That got real quiet real fast. By Friday, he was eager to schedule a comprehensive assessment. But Veronica didn't sit still. By Sunday night, my neighbor Janet called to tell me women from Pine Valley had been phoning around asking if I seemed confused lately, if grief had affected my judgment, if I should still be living alone. It was a nasty old trick. If you can't beat the facts, you try to ruin the witness. That was when the real twist walked in. My daughter Sarah came down from Portland with a briefcase and exactly none of my patience. Sarah's an environmental attorney. She's got her mother's brain, my stubborn streak, and the kind of calm that makes bullies nervous. I told her everything: the creek diversion, the bribe, the smear campaign. She didn't look shocked. She looked insulted. "This woman picked the wrong old man," she said. Sarah went into the county office the next morning with my medical records, complaint files, and enough legal language to make a bureaucrat sweat through a blazer. She shut down the harassment angle in under an hour. But that wasn't the best part. The best part was what she found in the federal law. I had been staring at this like a county corruption case. Sarah saw the bigger trap. Willow Creek feeds into a protected watershed, And under newer federal rules, if illegal modification creates breeding habitat for a protected species, the government can trigger emergency habitat protection over the affected area. Those backed up pools behind Veronica's concrete mess weren't just ugly. They were exactly the kind of shallow water certain amphibians love. The next morning, I checked one of my trail cameras and saw movement in the pools. Small dark bodies' tails flicking through the water. I grabbed my field glasses, looked closer, and nearly laughed out loud. Northwestern salamander larvae, dozens of them. Veronica had tried to destroy a creek and accidentally built a nursery. And then because panic makes fools creative, she made it worse. That night, around 2 in the morning, I heard machinery again. She'd sent the same crew back out to smash up the concrete, probably hoping to erase the evidence before inspectors arrived. Instead, they broke the barrier into scattered chunks that created even more pools, more shelter, more perfect breeding habitat. By then, Sarah was in full war mode. She coordinated with state wildlife people and made sure the inspection team knew exactly what they were looking at. I spent the weekend mapping pools, photographing larvae, and walking through Martha's oak grove, touching the bark like I was reporting back to her. Tuesday morning came bright and cold with that clean mineral smell the creek gets after a sharp night. County and state vehicles rolled in. Mike looked like a man attending his own funeral. The wildlife specialist started taking readings. Federal observers showed up with clipboards and cameras. Then Veronica came marching over in a dark power suit and serious heels, trying to bully the morning into going her way. She launched into some speech about drainage improvements and community safety, but the specialist barely looked up before saying, "Ma'am, I'm documenting protected breeding habitat." I watched her face change, irritation, confusion, then the slow, cold horror of somebody realizing the fire they set has reached their own curtains. And because panic had officially grabbed the wheel, she did the dumbest thing I have ever seen a smart-looking person do. She pulled out her phone right there in front of county officials, state specialists, federal observers, microphones, cameras, and tried to make another deal, loudly, $10,000 to make the federal inspection disappear. The silence after that was almost holy. One of the federal specialists lifted her phone and said, very calm, "Ms. Ashworth, are you attempting to interfere with a federal environmental assessment?" Veronica shrank 3 sizes in 5 seconds. The habitat designation moved fast after that. Too fast for spin, too fast for denial, too fast for Pine Valley to pretend it was all a misunderstanding. Once the breeding site was confirmed, development restrictions kicked in. Alterations froze. Property values dropped like anchors. And Veronica still had one last crooked move left. She tried to push through the sale of her mansion using forged federal environmental clearances. That might have worked on somebody sleepy, except the buyers had a sharp attorney who noticed the signature belonged to an EPA official who'd been dead for 3 years. By Thursday afternoon, the sale collapsed. By Friday, the FBI had what it needed. That evening, Pine Valley held an emergency town hall, and I'll tell you this, there are few sounds sweeter than a packed room full of wealthy people realizing their tyrant sold them fraud, dressed up as leadership. Veronica got up and tried one more time, called me a bitter widower, said all this was happening over some stupid salamanders. That was when I stood up. I told them what she'd done. The illegal diversion, the payoff, the lies, the forged documents, the attempt to paint me as senile because I wouldn't back down. Then I told them the one thing I'd learned too late in life. Some people care so much about value they lose the ability to recognize worth. Veronica looked at that creek and saw resale numbers. Martha looked at it and heard comfort healing life. Veronica saw land to manage. Martha saw something beautiful enough to protect. One of those ways of living leaves behind an oak grove, school children, wildlife, and clean water. The other leaves behind handcuffs. Then the FBI agent stepped forward and arrested Veronica right there in front of everybody. 8 months later, Pine Valley doesn't look polished anymore. It looks alive. The salamanders multiplied, birds came back, otters showed up. A beaver moved in upstream and built a better dam than Veronica ever did. HOA fees vanished. Taxes dropped. Her mansion sold cheap and got turned into a field research station. And me? The federal government hired me as habitat monitor for the protected area. So now I walk Martha's Grove with mud on my boots and legal authority on my side, and nobody goes near that creek with a shovel without hearing from me. School kids come every Friday with notebooks and magnifying glasses. Sarah brings my granddaughters on weekends. And some evenings when the light goes gold through the oaks and the water sounds just right, I stand there long enough to believe Martha would have smiled at how this turned out. Not because revenge won, because greed finally ran into a line it couldn't buy its way across. So let me ask you this, when somebody uses money, status, and local power to wreck something beautiful, how far is too far when it comes to fighting back? And if you've ever dealt with HOA abuse, corrupt officials, or somebody who mistook grief for weakness, tell me what happened. I really want to hear where you draw the line between justice and payback.